Breaking news. The Russians are under wholesale bombardment by Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles. Right now, they are targeting nuclear facilities, oil refineries, gas facilities as deep as 800 kilometers beyond the front lines in Russia. These critical infrastructure targets are completely indefensible. It's an untenable situation that gets worse by the day for the Russians, and it appears as though there's been no change in policy from the previous administration. Ukraine is doing all of this to the tacit approval of the Trump administration, which means that all of this public posturing about being a peace broker with the Russians is all a farce. And today I'm going to tell you why what Trump is doing behind the scenes, and it's really not Trump, it's his advisory team, it's the deep state tentacles that just run so deep that are directing him to engage in the way that he currently is, are actually bringing us far closer to the brink, believe it or not, than the conventional proxy war that Biden waged with Russia on the Ukrainian front actually was. Remember, we're normalized now to this level of drone strikes. We're talking about hundreds of drones in these salvos being fired at once. And this is something that's happening with greater frequency as Ukraine begins to proliferate more of these drone systems. Contrary to any sort of statements about withholding aid from Ukraine, the weapons are still flowing into Ukraine, and Ukraine would not do this if it was not greenlit by the United States government. Understand that. Okay, somebody on Trump's national security team is advising Ukraine, go ahead with the strikes. It's okay, because if they weren't, Ukraine wouldn't be doing this. And so when it initially happened that the decision was made and Biden said, we approve deep strikes into Russia utilizing these Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles, deep strikes they consider the Kursk region, but effectively, tacitly also approving these deeper strikes with these UAVs. I was wondering why Trump never said anything. He didn't say anything for like 4 weeks, and then he finally made a passing statement of disapproval, which was really just more rhetoric about how we need to end this thing already type stuff, as he usually does, not focusing too much specifically on condemning the green lighting of deep strikes into Russia. But what Trump's about to do now, in the next 4 years, is actually going to put the world on edge in a way that I don't think anybody expects. And we're going to be talking about his plans to deploy a new Iron Dome missile shield and why most people don't understand what that really signifies at this point in time. What it's going to do is essentially put Russia and China in a position where they're going to be at a strategic disadvantage when it comes to a potential for a first strike by the United States. If the United States can make an indomitable situation, an impenetrable force field, even if we can minimize the amount of retaliatory strike, in such case that we strike first against our adversaries, which is a part of the U.S. policy. It's written in the nuclear doctrine that there are certain situations that allow them to use a nuclear weapon first. If we do that, we put the Chinese and the Russians in a very precarious situation, which they may actually be incentivized then to do a preemptive strike on us. I'm going to explain all the details of what exactly they're going to do with this Iron Dome system, which is very similar to what Reagan proposed in the Strategic Defense Initiative back in the early 80s, when a lot of this wasn't even feasible then. From a scientific standpoint, technical standpoint, it wasn't even achievable. It's purely theoretical. Now they claim to actually have the technology. Whether or not they do is another story. But make no mistake, this type of posturing, Greenland, INF Treaty, threats to do nuclear tests, threats to boost a missile defense shield, all of that stuff is far more threatening existentially to Russia and China than a proxy war on Russia's border. And I'm going to explain in just a moment. Now, with respect to what is going on inside Kiev, not inside Kiev, but on the Eastern Front and in Russia right now, Kiev allegedly, according to Russian state media, now, so take this with a grain of salt, but typically Russia is fairly reserved because they understand the potential for escalation, and with their public especially, they don't want to admit that they've been attacked at a nuclear target and not respond, because that, of course, would make them look weak in the minds of their own population. So I don't think they say this stuff lightly. Kiev attempted to target a Russian nuclear facility, according to the governor of Smolensk. It's come under a massive drone attack, as you can see here. This is a Telegram account who documents missile and drone attacks, most of which we never hear about because the fog of war is so thick. The videos that we do get are few and far between. It's illegal to upload these videos. So there's probably hundreds more drones that we don't see, okay? Ukraine is doing this on a daily basis now, and it's only intensified since the Trump inauguration, which is confirming my thesis that, in fact, we may actually find ourselves in a far more intractable situation under Trump with Ukraine. Many people have thought the focus was going to shift to the Middle East in Iran. But if they can't contain the situation on the Russian-Ukrainian front, I don't think anybody's going anywhere. And that situation can spiral out of control very quick. Multiple Ukrainian drones targeted civilian infrastructure in the Smolensk region. A UAV reportedly was intercepted near a nuclear power facility. And they're claiming that according to preliminary information, it wasn't just like, oh, it was in the same town. Oftentimes that's what gets reported. A Ukrainian drone struck a town that has a nuclear facility, even though it was like 50 miles away. According to preliminary information, one of the drones was shot down during an attempted attack on a nuclear power facility. I presume they're able to determine that with the trajectory. And other aspects, technical things that are beyond my pay grade. And some reports indicate that the debris fell near the Smolenskaya nuclear power plant. No casualties or damage were immediately reported, the governor said, but he urged residents to stay calm, etc., etc. Russian regions of Bryansk, Tver, Novgorod also came under coordinated attacks. I believe there was numerous other places: Volgograd, Saratov, Samara, Tambov, Lipetsk, Kazan. This one was in Kazan. This is their fourth largest oil refinery. I don't even know how Russia still has a functional critical infrastructure and oil and gas economy at this point in time. These are just untenable targets. There's no defending against these types of flurries of attacks. They've tried, they've put nets on. You can only have so many air defense that you have to spread out. So Trump is green-lighting this, okay? No, not Trump personally. They're probably keeping him in the dark. I mean, the guy's signing different executive order every day. You can't expect him to know everything and everything that's going on. Maybe when he catches wind of what's going on, he's going to put the brakes on things. But as of now, right now, what the Trump administration is doing is worse in the sense that they're attacking more targets. And even since Trump was elected, okay, we've seen the Russians demonstrate Orezhnik for reasons I'll get into in a moment. There's a reason why they did it after Trump was elected, okay, because it was a directed message to Trump. The targeting, the assassination of the chief of their chemical, biological, and nuclear program that happened after Trump's election, not before his inauguration, of course. So all of these provocative acts, again, would not be done. Zelensky would not risk it at this point in time to do something that will piss the Americans off. That is their lifeline, okay? Now let's hear what Trump has to say about the new Iron Dome system, which is essentially Strategic Defense Initiative 2.0, also known as the Star Wars program of the Reagan era. Let's see what he has to say about it.
To immediately begin the construction of a state-of-the-art Iron Dome missile defense shield, which will be able to protect Americans. You know, we protect other countries, but we don't protect ourselves. And when Ronald Reagan wanted...
Okay, I just have to interject there because when America protects other countries, it's not because they're necessarily being altruistic. It's out of self-serving interests. It's to police the sea corridors. It's so that you can continue to have the golden credit card so you can print as much money as you want and still people will still want to buy into your stock market and project the amount of power through expeditionary force that is required to sustain the Pax Americana. That's what it's all about. So it's not just, hey, we're doing all this stuff philanthropically. We're doing it because it benefits us in some way, shape, or form. So all of this idea that, yes, there are certain cases where we're intervening for the benefit of corporations, but that's all viewed as entangled into the military, industrial, government complexes, okay?
To do it many years ago. Luckily, we didn't. We didn't have the technology then. It was a concept, but we didn't. Now we have phenomenal technology. You see that with Israel. We're out of
It's a completely different ballgame when you're dealing with missiles coming in at Mach 20.
319 rockets they knocked down.
So the only thing, there really is nothing, I think, that's going to be very similar to the Iron Dome, maybe in terms of the AI that's employed, maybe some of the radars that are employed, but this is going to be a completely different system that involves space-based weaponry, and I'll explain it all in just a moment.
About every one of them. So I think the United States is entitled to that, and everything will be made right here in the USA, 100%.
Yeah, that's part of it, is the supply chain required in order to do this. Again, if you are Russia and you see yourself surrounded, I'm talking about surrounded, okay? I'm just checking my audio here to make sure it's good. Take a look at the situation. Russia is in such a strategic disadvantage. And remember, all of these attacks that Ukraine is doing right now, all of that data about Russian missile defense is being likely directed back to the mothership that is mapping all of this data that they could potentially leverage in a decapitation strike, okay? Whether it's the radars, the missile defense, the layout of everything, all of these are all probing operations. Now, let's find something here. Where was I talking about? Okay, I was talking about the map. So the strategic disadvantage of the Russians. So Russia is surrounded. U.S. military bases are proximate to pretty much all of their major cities, with the exception of all this in Siberia, where they have continuity of government stuff and probably some nuclear weapons are going to launch from there. However, nothing that, in terms of population centers and things of that nature. Most of Moscow's population is around here, and they are completely and utterly surrounded. All of this blue is American military bases, and all of this is pretty much NATO, and Ukraine is pretty much the battering ram of NATO. And now they're going into Greenland as well, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And there's a reason why space-based is based in Greenland, and it's primarily for the purpose of missile defense. Remember when people are joking about Space Force? It's all about fighting nuclear war. That's what every aspect of this is about. And Russia is surrounded in the Arctic, from Canada to Alaska to Greenland to Europe. They're completely surrounded. And now you have a situation where the United States is saying, hey, we're going to build something that makes our airspace largely impenetrable, at least in theory, to your nuclear missiles. Which means that if we were to engage with our bombers that are very proximate to your major cities and the prime targets, then we could potentially do a decapitation strike, neutralize a lot of your nukes through cyber attacks using AI and a combination of space lasers and the whole 9 yards, right? And likely minimize the amount of blowback and the counterattack to the point where perhaps we don't even sustain too many blows. Of course, they have to deal with China. China's not just going to sit idly by. And so that's the problem, right? But this is very provocative. Understand, this is a bigger move than starting a war with Ukraine. Let's not forget what started the war with Russia in the first place. What was it? Do you remember what happened in November of 2019? Do you remember what happened? Actually, it was in 2021. Well, do you remember in November of 2019, Trump backed out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a huge preemption to all of this. But in November of 2021, Russia shot down one of their own satellites as a shot across the bow. And this was right when all the talk that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Well, Russia was claiming that it was actually Ukraine that was about to invade the Donbass, and that they were their intelligence was basically guiding them to create a defensive force in that region. Now we know Russia had every intent of going in and taking over Ukraine, and it didn't work out as well as they perhaps initially planned. Nonetheless, all these things are connected. Okay, it's a continuity of the exact same policies. That's why if you're trying to understand the big picture geopolitical stuff, you can't look at the puppet. You have to look at the puppeteer. And the puppeteer is whatever you want to hate. I'm really starting to hate the term deep state. It's just so trite at this point and cliche. But there is a certain undercurrent of interests that run through U.S. politics, NATO politics, that remains even though the president leaves office. And so that still continues to this day. Now, Trump will go and shake Putin's hand. Make no mistake about that. Will anything change? I don't think so. Because fundamentally, where it matters, confrontation and belligerence and brinkmanship is afoot. Now, just prior to Trump's, actually just after he was elected and after he won the election, the Russians did this. They demonstrated the intermediate missile, the Orezhnik, which travels in excess of Mach 10. Pretty much can't be taken out by any form of missile defense, at least none that we know about yet. That was a sign, that was a shot across the bow to Trump, warning him, because they remember with the INF, okay, they remember all of that stuff. And as we're going to talk about, there's plenty of other circumstantial data points that are going to inform this thesis and support my thesis that indeed we could see the risk of nuclear Armageddon under Trump is actually worse than under Biden, okay? So here's what Trump is proposing. And I don't necessarily disagree with this. I just know what it entails, and I know why they haven't embarked upon this sort of thing. And you'll notice that the Biden administration was tasked with what? Engaging Russia conventionally on the front in this game of attrition and potentially trying to kind of edge them out and get them to come to heel, which of course they never have. They still haven't to this day. Keeping it at the level of just before Russia had to do something that was too demonstratively crazy, like detonate a nuke somewhere, which, we got very close to that point. Arguably, they were skirting that line. But what is the other side of that coin? Did we increase the DEFCON level throughout that point? We did towards the end of the Biden administration when they altered the strategic posture. Remember that? When they put more submarines out to sea, they did that last November. I got all the receipts on here to show you in just a moment. But they only did that towards the end because Trump's job and the Republicans' job is the 30,000 square foot strategic view. The Biden administration's job was to engage Russia directly on a conventional level and deplete their military and their economy. And at that, they pretty much failed. Trump's mission is going to be to fortify the homeland, make it EMP proof, engage in missile defense, probably nuclear proliferation as well. Never mind this talk about we're going to, meet with Putin and talk about decommissioning nuclear weapons. It's not going to happen, okay? They're talking about space-based warfare. He was the guy who made Space Force, remember? The purpose of Space Force is to fight a nuclear war, primarily. The Elon Musk thing, the SpaceX connection, all the black budget classified government contracts with SpaceX. It all makes sense that Trump is the World War III guy, even the Pete Hegseth thing, so they can conscript more soldiers. There was another executive order today which is trying to emasculate or remasculate the U.S. military once again. And I guarantee you, before I give it like 2 or 3 months, maybe when it gets a little warmer out, you're going to see Pete Hegseth running comprehensive firearms drills, tacked out, running drills, and it's going to be a part of some commercial or some shit like that. Yeah, you're going to see it, okay? And when you see it, just remember, you owe me a coffee for that one because I was calling that for a long, long time. Now, here's what's going on. So when you launch a nuclear weapon, there is the boost phase, and I'm not an expert on this. I'm going to have to get our buddy Castle Bravo back on here to break this all down for you guys. Boost phase, mid-course phase, and the re-entry phase. You can target it at any of those phases. The most critical phase and the easiest place to interdict it, where it's traveling the slowest, is in the boost phase. And the problem is, though, you kind of have to be fairly omnipresent with your interception capabilities in order to do that, right? You need to be pretty close to it because you have a brief amount of time in order to intercept it. So what they want to do is they want to weaponize space, which would be, of course, in defiance to the space-based treaties that were signed in the 60s that said we're not going to weaponize space. And what is something else that happened last year? There was that whole fiasco that happened between Russia and the United States, both of which accusing each other of weaponizing space. And what do we have up in Greenland? We have Space Base, Space Force Base at Pituffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, right? Space, Elon Musk, Space Force, Greenland, Pituffik, Arctic, Russia, nukes, stealth bombers, Tomahawk missiles in Germany. Does it all make sense? The Baltics putting frickin' dragon's teeth along the entire border. You guys think this thing is over, man. And now they're talking about, we're gonna get rid of income tax. 5 trillion, we don't need 5 trillion. You know where they're gonna get that 5 trillion? They're gonna print it. And they're gonna debase the currency, just like they're gonna have to do here in Canada after they get these tariffs thrown at us. And that's gonna be it. It's gonna be game over. This is the end game, okay? The market's gonna crash under Trump. And for those of you who are in that personality cult, that's not a slight against Trump himself. In fact, honestly, I think Trump, and I'll say this genuinely, I don't think Trump is a bad guy. You know, I think that he is being informed by people, but a guy who's up there so long and just spitballs like that, freeform, a guy like that can't lie because you'd be caught in the lie. You know, like people who lie or are deceitful, they don't want to do that. So that's what I appreciate about Trump, which is not to say that his policies aren't going to bring us to nuclear Armageddon, okay? Because they probably are. Now, let's just talk about what's going down here, okay? So here's what we got going on. Now, I'm not even going to begin to try to break this down technically. You can go and you can research this on your own time, but this is based on scientific journals. This is based on the most up-to-date information that we know about this proposed Iron Dome system. So taking out a nuclear missile, this is how it's typically, well, at least theoretically supposed to be done, this is how the U.S. missile defense system defends against incoming missiles. You have satellite sensors, you have ground-based radar, long-range radar, sea-based radar, that big what do you call that thing? The Death Star looking thing that floats in the Pacific Ocean, ground-based radar and forward-based radar. All of these things try to calculate exactly where this missile is so that you can launch an interceptor, which is pretty much virtually impossible considering thousands of these are going to be coming in. You're probably going to need, and you don't know which one's a decoy and which one isn't, you're going to need probably 100 times that number of interceptors in order to guarantee that you hit everything, because these things are traveling at Mach 20. Almost impossible to stop. That's why Ronald Reagan wanted to do this space, what was it called, Star Wars program back in the early 80s, which I think the reason why it never really went through, not only because it was impractical, but the Soviet Union was also starting to collapse at the same time. But here's how it's going to work, okay? The Iron Dome of America. This initiative aims to protect the United States from a range of aerial threats, including ballistic, hypersonic, and advanced cruise missiles. Space-based, let's just think about this, though. You ain't firing any advanced cruise missile at the United States. This is for ICBMs. Because if you're doing that, it's all-out war, right? How much time do we got left here? Okay, we're good. Space-based interceptors and sensors. The deployment of hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor layer to detect and track incoming threats. This could potentially be what Elon Musk is involved in. You know, this mad dash hysteria, we got to get to Mars and all this crap. There's no economically viable reason that they could ever foot the bill for a Mars trip, and there really is no national security reason at all. Like the Russians and the Chinese, if anything, they want to build a base on the moon, a nuclear base on the moon. If Elon Musk starts talking about that, then I'll probably take him seriously. Until then, we know that this is just cover for the weaponization of space, and that is why he's making all these emergency declarations, whether it's with AI or this, we got to get to Mars as soon as possible. No, you want to get to space because you want to put spy satellites, these sensors, these various weapons, development of proliferated space-based interceptors capable of neutralizing missiles during their boost phase, thus weaponizing space, which is in defiance to the treaty, right? And this is why Russia is in the process. This is why they initially, back in 2021, shot that satellite out of the sky, and why the Chinese and the Russians are developing counter-satellite technology that is actually in space. And so the Russians are making satellites that are going to counter the American weapon satellites, only theirs is indiscriminate, which means that it's a nuke and it's just going to blow up everything, okay? Which could, of course, create a, what do they call it, a Kessler syndrome, where there's just a bunch of space junk and nobody can escape the planet, even if we wanted to, for thousands and thousands of years. Terrestrial defense enhancements and implementation of an underlayer and terminal phase intercept capabilities to destroy missiles in their final approach. So we're going to see attempts to interdict at all three phases with this missile defense program. Advancements of non-kinetic technologies such as directed energy weapons to complement traditional missile interception methods. A pre-launch and boost phase interdiction. Pre-launch. Now, I believe that this is where Elon Musk might come into play, whether it's in intercepting communications or cyber warfare or some space-based laser neutralization of a missile silo, or who knows what sort of technology AI is going to come up with, but basically it's a development of the capabilities to neutralize missile threats before they are launched or during their initial boost phase. So to detect when the Russians are getting ready to launch it would require a level of intelligence that I don't think they're able to get from, using these contemporary methods. But I could be wrong about that. Also, supply chain security, establishing of a secure supply chain for all components, ensuring resilience and security in the production and deployment of defense systems. That would only matter. That sounds like strategic stockpiling to me. I mean, I get it. You want to be self-reliant. The government is the biggest prepper, remember, with all of their strategic reserves of various types. But that also seems to suggest some urgency on their part, that they want to have resilience, especially if they're going to be decoupled from China and all of their rare earth metals. Submit a comprehensive implementation plan within 60 days. That is the executive order that is mandating the Department of Defense. They have 60 days. This plan is expected to outline the architecture, capability requirements, and funding strategies necessary for the development and the deployment of the missile shield. The proposed system seeks to address more complex threats than what the initial Star Wars plan sought to mediate, including ICBMs and hypersonic weapons. As previously indicated, estimates suggest that deploying a nationwide Iron Dome-like network could cost trillions of dollars. So, that's what you have to look forward to. This is slightly different from the Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative, which had all of this stuff in mind at the time, but they didn't have the technology like we do now to deploy it. So now it's actually quite feasible that they're going to do it. Remember, back in May of 2024, a senior Pentagon official warned lawmakers that Russia is developing an indiscriminate nuclear weapon to go into space. and they confirmed reports from several months ago and described potentially devastating effects in orbit. Now, of course, the Russians will claim that no, it's the Americans who are weaponizing space, and I have no reason not to believe them. There was that one space plane, what was it, the X-37B or something to that effect, and of course everything, all these shenanigans that are going on with Elon Musk, you can't possibly believe that Vladimir Putin is sitting there and thinking how great it would be to go to Mars, okay? That's fodder for the masses. You know, the people in charge in other countries who are watching us are laughing their ass off while, you know, they sell us on this Mars fantasy while we stock up on Fartcoin. The U.S. says Russia launched a space weapon in the path of an American satellite. The Kremlin accused Washington of disinformation Wednesday when it conducted exercises to simulate the use of tactical nuclear weapons in a likely warning to the West over Ukraine. So, yeah, I mean, there's all of this. We don't know what the heck is going on in space. They clashed back in April over the placement of nuclear weapons in space. It's pretty clear that none of the nuclear type treaties are being enforced at this point in time. Russia is surrounded. China's economy is in the pisser, and that's desperation. And ours isn't better either, okay? Because all they're going to do is print money, hoping that they can keep the whole thing afloat for a little bit longer so that they can build out this nuclear missile defense thing that's going to cost trillions of dollars. So when the time comes that nobody's buying the US dollar anymore, that will be the time when it, you know, basically comes to war, and hopefully they can be prepared. Everything Elon Musk is currently engaged in, from the boring tunnel to Tesla, which is for the purpose of training an AI system that will be weaponized someday as well in combat, boring tunnels deep into the earth as a very clandestine way of, a covert way, I think is the better word, of getting the population ready to, not the population, but the elites ready, getting those tools ready that they can build out the infrastructure for continuity of government plans that already exist in other countries, where they just tell their population outright, they level with them and they're like, yeah, we're preparing for Armageddon. You should too, but here we don't do that because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. Even Trump doesn't want to hurt people's feelings. Nuclear weapons, currently chief among them in Germany, as well as Incirlik. I don't know how long those ones are going to last in Turkey, but now that the Germans are getting Tomahawk missiles, you know what that means, right? That means that there's a potential for those to be weaponized as well. And with all of these nukes so close to Russia, the Russians have to be sweating in light of the fact that policy that Ukraine is currently exhibiting with the deep strikes inside Russia have not changed at all, not one iota. According to President Donald Trump, he withdrew from the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty back in February of 2019 because he claimed that Russia has not, unfortunately, honored the agreement. So we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out. Lo and behold, what does Russia do immediately after Trump is elected? They shoot off an intermediate range missile that could have been nuclear tipped, the Orezhnik. Clearly a statement. U.S. cruise missiles returning to Germany. This is last July. Remember back in March of 2019, I actually applauded Trump for this. He ordered agencies to prepare for potential EMP attacks. Now, I believe that executive order was repealed by the Biden administration, but essentially it boiled down to looking at ways that they could harden the grid. I don't think the urgency was there at the time like it is now, so they may well endeavor to do this once again. But that is something that absolutely is essential. If you want to know how essential it is, go watch the videos that I've done with Jonathan Hollerman, especially a most recent episode. He works with the EMP Task Force for Homeland Security, and he was talking about how the Chinese on some of these transformers have the capability to disable them remotely, okay? So, you know, just have a backup plan, have a backup power supply. Recently, 1 month ago, Sergei Ryabkov, the country's deputy foreign minister in Russia, who oversees arms control, asserted that Trump had taken a radical position on a treaty banning nuclear test during his first term, and this indeed has been reiterated by numerous people in Trump's cabinet currently, and many of his advisors who are all echoing the sentiment that they should recommence nuclear testing. In fact, the testing grounds have already been primed and prepared by the Biden administration. Once again, this clearly suggests that it's just a continuity of a much broader, deeper plan. Russia has warned Donald Trump not to resume nuclear testing. That said, the Russians have also prepared their nuclear testing grounds in retaliation to this. Last November, the Department of Defense adjusted their nuclear defense deterrence strategy, they claim, because nuclear peer adversaries were escalating. Multiple nuclear peer adversaries, including, of course, China and the North Koreans, possibly the Iranians, are now forcing the Americans to ramp up the DEFCON level without effectively doing so. And that is the real deception under the Biden administration, is that throughout all of that, they didn't officially do anything that suggested that they ramped up the DEFCON level. They did a little bit, and there was more activity, but nothing that was too noticeable to the public. And they did that for a reason, because they didn't want to spook the public into thinking that the conventional war they were fighting could potentially lead to all-out nuclear war and World War III, which of course was starting to culminate towards the end of Biden's term. And that, I would say, arguably was peak concern about nuclear war. Now it's kind of subsided, but as I'm demonstrating today, there's no basis for that. If anything, it's potentially because Trump is such a wild card, and if Putin does not comply, then we're going to see a fight. And so what this basically did was put more submarines, nuclear submarines on patrol, and bombers on patrol, as well as the forward deployment of B-61 tactical nuclear bombs. They're putting F-35 deployment systems all along the Russian border, at least as close as you get to it without Russia taking issue with it. Immediate issue anyways. And of course, there's the Greenland thing, which is all just a cover to build out space base, the Patufic space base in Greenland. That's pretty much all they want to do. Is it about mining and stuff? Maybe, but that comes with a huge upfront investment that doesn't see returns for many, many years, and especially in the current decoupling environment where parts are very hard to come by and they're getting more and more expensive. Building out that type of infrastructure ain't cheap at this point in time. So while it's true there might be resources there, I think it's primarily a do with getting us ready for World War III when the American debt bubble collapses, right? So this is a Patufic Air Base. It actually is the largest by area, not by personnel, but it is the largest base by area in the world outside of U.S. borders. This is the now known as space-based, which is aptly termed because, of course, it is primarily for the purpose of intercontinental ballistic missile defense, which is largely an issue which is moderated through space, right? Elon Musk SpaceX is building spy satellite network for U.S. intelligence. This was back in March of 2024 as well. I believe that one is a $1.8 billion contract. Trump's pick to run NASA, this is from last December. I'm not sure if this guy has been selected yet. Jared Isaacman has flown on SpaceX missions, and he's a big SpaceX fan and initial funder. So it's a big club, guys. And as the usual saying goes, you ain't in it. Now, these clowns over at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists think that we're only 1 second, after everything that happened in the past year, we're only 1 second closer to midnight. It's farcical. And it's even more farcical considering that back in 2018, the clock was at 1 hour and 20 minutes to midnight. And I believe they changed it to 100 seconds to midnight on January of 2020, before the COVID thing, okay? So from 2018 to 2020, when virtually nothing happened, nothing major happened throughout that period of time. There was the Australian wildfires, there was the Iranian thing, and so they bumped it up to 100 seconds to midnight, 20 seconds just for those two things. Now consider what's happened between January of 2020 and now. 5 years. 5 years of total effing chaos, and they've only moved at 11 seconds, which tells you they're just milking this now. This is completely irrelevant and useless. Gold is rebounding once again. As I predicted yesterday, I knew that this would be a dead cat bounce because I knew that the basis that the market was basing their bearish sentiment about NVIDIA on were false. The NVIDIA chips are still in demand, whether this DeepSeek company is using chips or using NVIDIA chips or not. For numerous reasons that I'm not going to get into again, but go and watch that video if you want more information. Yeah, the NVIDIA bubble is going to continue. And it's only going to get, based on what the CEO, Sam Altman, and the new CEO of Microsoft posted today, they posted this real chummy picture with this. They were just grinning ear to ear like they knew something, you know? So they're in no way, shape, or form concerned about, you know, the bubble popping anytime soon. The only way it pops is with a black swan event, but they're going to do it, but it's going to be when they want to do it. Really, at this point, I'm convinced that the market is pretty much completely rigged in terms of when it's going to crash, because you need whales to bail to trigger the algorithms to, you know, basically reverse everything and to make everybody start panic selling. And that's when it happens. When you get a few days of panic selling, that's when people want to get out. But right now, irrational exuberance prevails. In Canada, they're getting ready to, is it the Premier of BC, or this guy is, I'm not sure, he's a BC politician, British Columbia in Canada. He's saying that they're proposing that when these Trumps go into tariffs, when these tariffs take effect on February 1st, the 25% tariffs that Trump is insisting, or Trump's spokesperson today insisted are going to be put through on February 1st, that now they're going to have to compensate people and pay them out in the same way that they did during the pandemic. Well, where's that money going to come from? They're going to debase the currency, okay? And this is how the Liberal government is going to attempt to stay in power, by paying people off with their own money. Because what this means is that the price of everything is going to go up even more. So if they are planning seriously on supplementing people who are going to lose their jobs, I mean, there's EI, right? There's EI for a reason. If you work a job for a certain period of time, you basically get this safety net for 6 months. For some people, it's longer, depending on how much you worked. It's not that much. I've had to use it in the past, but it's enough to kind of get you by and get you looking for something else. But if they're trying to, you know, entice people with something above and beyond that, where's the money going to come from? They're trying to buy votes is what they're trying to do, because they know Poilievre is probably not going to mess with that sort of thing. If you want to support me and this channel, I don't ask for much. I don't, you know, put ads right at the front. I mean, YouTube puts the ads throughout. If the ads are a problem, I would strongly recommend the best $11, even if you're poor. If you're on YouTube for as long as you're probably on it, I know you're on it for several hours a day, it's the best $11 you'll ever spend, okay? Because you can, and that's YouTube Premium I'm talking about. There's no ads. I cannot go back to normal YouTube. The best $11 I ever spend. You can listen to stuff on your phone without having to have the screen on, which is huge, so you can treat everything sort of like a podcast. And I'm sure there's a few other perks, but go do that. But the best way you can support the channel, CanadianPrepper.com. I don't have to say CanadianPreparedness.com anymore. You know why? Well, there was this cyber squatting snake, this sleazy little rat-faced bitch who was squatting on my domain for several years. Yeah, you know who you are. I doubt you watch the channel because, quite frankly, you seem quite uninformed. They were asking me for exorbitant amounts of money for the domain, okay? They were asking for a lot of money, in the tens of thousands of USD. Well, I got them to drop their panties because they became pretty desperate as of recent. And initially, they turned down my counteroffer. They reached out to me this time with a lower offer because I was going to take them to court. But then I realized, shit, it's going to cost me just as much, even though what they're doing is illegal in the eyes of ICANN, which is the international agency that oversees these sorts of disputes. And it was just too much money, so I just let it go. I said, screw it. Screw CanadianPrepper.com. We're going to focus on CanadianPreparedness.com, even though that domain gets tens of thousands of hits a month. But he must have been really desperate. He must have lost a bunch of money on Fartcoin or something. But, you know, that is just sleazy behavior in my personal... If that's how you make a living, you know, squatting on domains, I get that to a degree it's legal, but it's just... I don't understand how a person could, you know, live a life like that. It's a scam, you know, it's a legal scam. Anyways, we got the domain. We got it for a fraction of the price that they were initially asking for years ago when the money was worth twice as much. So they got doubly fucked on that. And I'm just happy. I got my domain. I got CanadianPrepper.com and we got CanadianPrepper.ca as well. But if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it, guys, go and gear up while the getting is good. The price of food, the price of beef, record highs, okay? The price of eggs, record highs. Stock up on freeze-dried food before they jack the price up because we are long overdue for a price hike on freeze-dried food. The price of some of our beef, I would say, is comparable to what you're paying for it in the store, and it's freeze-dried, made to last 25 to 30 years. Okay, and it's high quality stuff. We don't sell any shit at the store, okay? So that's the best thing you can do, is go and do that. But the least you can do is leave a like, comment, and subscribe, my friends. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.